part 2 of our roundtable discussion for the Federal News Network series, Delivering the Tech That Delivers for Government, where we talk with leading technologists from federal systems integrators about the enterprise technology that helps agencies meet their mission. For this second part of our roundtable, sponsored by Future Tech Enterprise, we're going to dig into digital maturity and its role in helping ensure the enterprise can scale technology effectively as the organizations work to support federal customers. Our group of technology experts is back for this second roundtable conversation, which began with a discussion on innovation in part 1. We have with us today Doug Bourgeois, Managing Director for Engineering Transformation at Deloitte, Richard Jasek, the Chief Digital Officer and Senior Vice President at Brillient, Adam Shepard, the NG Fellow for Digital Engineering at Northrop Grumman, and Mike Watkinson, the Chief Revenue Officer at Future Tech Enterprise. So let's dive in. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Ready to go again? Here we go. So let's start off with you, Doug. Maybe talk a little bit about how you define digital maturity for lifecycle management at your organization at Deloitte.
Yeah, well, digital maturity, and this happens to be something that I have some experience with, even going back to my days when I was a CIO of a federal agency, where I was able to bring together our technology team and our business operations folks to transform the agency to be completely paperless in less than 2 years, from 100% paper-based, right? To me, that is by definition, digital maturity, right? And so how do we go about doing that? And that's something I've been able to bring to all of my clients in the technology industry ever since, right? And I'm going to fall back on the age-old framework that we bring to the industry in general, right? Which is people, process, and technology. It still always boils down to those indices. On the people side, it's preparing the individuals with the right training for the adoption of these technologies, as well as bring the broader organizational change management rigor and the planning and the risk management in order to appropriately execute all of these changes all at one time. On the process side, this is the digital side itself, right? This is fundamentally, and something that we're doing and bringing to our clients right now in my engineering transformation practice here at Deloitte, right, which is fundamentally breaking down the digital life cycle, the full life cycle, into its component parts and bringing in the latest and greatest automation and technology to advance the capabilities to basically make things happen more robustly and more rapidly throughout the digital modernization cycle, right? And then the technology side, of course, is bringing the innovative hybrid cloud, AI, automation, infrastructure as code, and bringing all that together in a secure, robust environment, and bringing the people and the process technology all together in orchestration to advance the agency, right?
I think the people part, I feel like the forgotten dimension in maturity is the culture of the organization. I think that's the piece that people tend to assume away. They're smart people. They think well. They're focused on the right things, but that doesn't mean they're ready to innovate. It doesn't mean they're ready to transform. I think a lot of people confuse modernization with transformation, and you can modernize without actually transforming and without improving. But I think to have an organization whose culture is ready to be mature and ready to be transformative, you have to help them understand that they can manage ambiguity a little bit. You have to help them understand that trying and failing isn't failing. It's trying and then thinking about what went wrong and trying again. So how do we create a safe space, a sandbox where you can try and fail without negatively impacting a customer or a citizen in some way? We're 100% focused on our client's mission, whether we're delivering it as part of a BPO and digital services contract, or whether we're enabling it with our technologies, or whether it's a combination. And so the first question I ask about maturity is always, is any of the op tech that we've created, whether it's back office, front office, or middle office, which is the stuff that I think about that is front and center in having our professionals support the customer, is any of that getting in your way? Because you can't be really mature if the technology is creating an artificial constraint to how you're trying to please your customer. If nothing's getting in your way, all right, now how's it enhancing what you're doing? Is it helping you think about risks in advance? Is it helping you plan for addressing those risks in advance? Is it helping you be creative and innovative and share approaches across different projects? So there's a whole set of mature elements that are critical in that middle office infrastructure to help our teams do better for the customer.
Maturity is the right word. It's a lifelong pursuit of mine, but it's also a
Not
journey.
digital, you mean personal maturity, yeah.
But it is a journey, and there are milestones along the way, and it's not A to B, it's A to Z, and we've got to recognize those milestones and take advantage of them along the way. Things like transitioning from CapEx models to OpEx models, and let alone the technologies themselves.
Right.
Very good.
So Adam, maybe talk about where you see your business now when it comes to achieving digital maturity and kind of where you want it to go to. Like, what's that path? We've kind of laid out a lot of elements of it. Maybe you can get to that piece of it.
Yeah, and maybe the elements of digital maturity, what does that look like? So we would say at Northrop Grumman, we've been on this digital forefront for decades. You know, going back to the 1980s, the B-2 program was the first 3D wireframe design airframe. That was a digital mature, or a step in digital maturity, right? In the 90s, we started going more model-based and linking some of those disparate functions together. Now we've formed and coined this term authoritative source of truth. So as that design and manufacturing progress, what is the authoritative source of truth that defines that? What is the config managed artifact that we're looking at? And now we're expanding that to collaboration with our customers that we talked about in part one. We've also talked about managing from a program execution perspective. Model-based program execution is this new term, but really bringing all of those together, aggregating all of those different functions into a consolidated digital ecosystem where you're able to share that authoritative source of truth and make data-driven decisions off of those artifacts is where we are focused on digital maturity. And so to answer your questions, how do we measure digital maturity? It's the integration and the sharing of data, not just internal amongst Northrop Grumman functions and disciplines, but also with our supply chain and more importantly, our customers, because we view them as critical in sharing this data and collaborating with them.
The natural progression of this discussion has hit on two really, really important points that I think it's important to try and tie together, and that's the culture and measuring digital maturity. And I think the two go really well together when executed successfully. And I go back to the example of the government agency where, and I reflect a lot on the reasons, the critical success factors of why we were able to have significant transformation be so successful in a short amount of time. One is with respect to the culture, is involving the end users from an operational standpoint in the iterative agile approach to testing and evaluation, user acceptance test through every sprint cycle, so that their footprint and their fingerprints are all over that technology as you're innovating using the latest digital capabilities. And then the more modern aspect of this is outcome-based digital maturity, where the outcomes that are desired from an organizational standpoint, but also from a more tactical standpoint with respect to the functions of those applications and those systems, is well defined and agreed upon and embedded into the test and evaluation from an iterative standpoint, and that brings the culture and the desired outcomes together throughout the agile methodology as digital maturity is achieved throughout the organization.
I think that's good. Can I riff on something Mike said though real quick, which was this idea of this sort of lifelong journey to maturity. When it comes to digital maturity, there is no done. Right? Done is dead. If you think you're done, you're dead. There's nothing.
If you're dead, you're done.
Exactly. There's no stopping. If you have no technical debt and no strategic backlog or no strategic growth competencies that you want to develop, there's a problem. You're not thinking broad enough. So I'm going to give a plug to technical debt and backlog. Generally, that is not always, but generally that's a good sign of a dynamic, maturing organization that's thinking about, here's what we have, and there's a gap to where we want to be. Now, how do we fill that gap?
That's great.
And then we're going to have another target, and we're going to fill that gap.
Mm-hmm. What about that idea that you brought up earlier, the barrier, right? Like when those barriers happen, it's part of digital maturity being aware enough to address that? Is that part of that? That's not necessarily a failure, right? Because it's there, you've installed it or put in place, or you're doing it virtually, but it's a barrier, right? How do you address that?
it is a barrier, and you have to be able to assess it objectively. And sometimes the folks that are in the middle of it can't assess it objectively. You need that third party, independent, you know what, I see that you're feeling this and you're thinking this, but maybe there's a different way to think about that. So maybe we look at that debt, maybe we look at that gap and say, yeah, we could fill it a traditional way, or we could apply some really innovative, emergent process changes, technology changes that might create a few more challenges in certain areas, but we'll solve this. Let's think about how that might look. But that's the mature conversation that you have.
Well, that's critical for scale, right? And
Correct.
also for bleeding this out across a broader part of the enterprise.
Yeah, I think a common theme that we're hearing is obviously the cultural or human element of this, but there's also fragmentation. But there's fragmentations of human elements and cultures as well that needs to be overcome. And so when you look at digital maturity, digital really is a method of communication where we historically didn't have the tools or the automation capabilities in the past that really enabled that.
I think one way to address, and I think you nailed it with that assessment. There's like looking forward, anticipating what those barriers are, and then building solutions that proactively work around and resolve those barriers before they're achieved. And I think one in today's context of innovation and digital maturity, I think has to do with bringing AI capabilities into the enterprise. And I think one way to do that and overcome some of the anticipated barriers would be, is bringing fully built out, tested, evaluated, and secured AI libraries supported by an AI optimized infrastructure and exposing that through a services layer to the end user, in this case, federal government clients, who can adopt that technology in a more seamless manner without having to worry about overcoming the barriers to building it themselves and integrating it themselves and securing it themselves, because that's already been done and now it's available to them to innovate and adapt.
So right before this, we started going down the line of how to scale and how to take advantage of digital maturity and avoid the barriers or resolve them. Let's talk about what are the benefits of it. How does achieving digital maturity at that moment, because we also agreed it never ends, how does that accelerate product delivery and reduce costs, specifically in the federal environment? How are you seeing that?
We have an ecosystem of products we call Alice. It's our artificial intelligence cognitive ecosystem. And we call them accelerators for a reason, because they embed all of the best technical and process-centric practices that we've learned from being in the fire with our government customers over the past decade. The intent and the promise of that is exactly what we're trying to achieve with digital maturity. Every step is evolutionary. We're trying to do what we did before, only make it better, improve it. Having that set of technologies and frameworks and approaches that is proven and is working and is in production and is already helping the government make better decisions and do better processing of mission services means that we can, with confidence, take that next evolutionary step. It means we can, instead of in months, in hours, create the prototype. In hours, create the sandbox where we can start playing and start envisioning and start understanding how their unique policy constraints and guidelines and environment might be displayed, deployed, and attacked in these with these technologies. So we need to be able to rely on that previous step. And if the tools were built in an environment that didn't embody digital maturity, there'd be rework. You'd have to go back. You couldn't trust that that foundation was useful. And everything we do in terms of trying to accelerate and get our government solutions done faster so that we can get to MVP and IOC within months and not years, and actually start seeing what we call beneficial use of the system for the stakeholders, is built on the fact that you have to start from a level of digital maturity. You have to be able to rely on that foundation, and then you need to be able to improve it. Right. And then you have to make that available to everybody.
Is that what you're doing too in Northrop Grumman? You have your own approach to it though, right? Your own
so,
take on it?
So our take on that, and it tees off a lot of what Richard talked about, is we hire experts to do their chosen career field. They went to school. They they have studied, they have a passion for certain areas, and we want to ultimately empower them to be the experts on what they want to be experts at. But we still have to have a cadre of experts for every phase of the life cycle. So when we talk about how do we reduce costs, one example we have is we invested in what's called the Digital Pathfinder. It was a platform built by our subsidiary Skilled Composites, but it is ultimately a technology demonstrator to prove out our digital ecosystem. Some facts that we have from that coming out is because we were able to embed our manufacturing teams with our design teams during the design phase, we've seen things like engineering rework drop from 15 to 20% down to less than 1% on Digital Pathfinder. The reason that that was successful is we were able to have manufacturing engineers give that real-time input during the design phase and say it's going to be more difficult to build it if you design it this way. Alternatively, we've also seen the manufacturing rework drop nearly in half because they were able to ultimately influence the design. And it's not just this design to manufacturing, it goes all the way back from requirements ultimately to building that solution and in sustainment as well. And the digital ecosystem connects all of these disparate functions to ultimately reduce cost, accelerate schedule.
So Adam, I just want to amplify or riff on something real quick, because what you said is super important. Almost everything we do can be commoditized, except for that deep knowledge of the engineering and the customer environment. Like those are the things that are not replaceable and not commoditizable in the market and by others. That's sort of the crux of adding value. You're not going to add value without it, or you're not going to add much value without it. And it's the thing that makes companies like ours valuable.
Of course.
That's also the digital ecosystem ties that knowledge together and makes it
Exactly.
available to more people across the enterprise and the organization.
And the barrier to entry to allow that collaboration goes down, because if you're historically disparate or geographically dispersed, picking up the phone used to be a barrier. Now it's I'm picking up the phone and I'm looking at the same data that person is creating when they're creating it.
We created a day one readiness catalog based on standards and commonality and repeatability that we see across our customers. But to your point, it becomes commoditized. That's not the point of the catalog. It's more about reducing engineering time. It's 80% directionally accurate. I just took out 6 months of sizing and engineering design time. But it's the evolution of that catalog, to your point, Richard, about how do we do not just sustainment, but evolution with innovation included in that catalog.
You can't stand still.
Exactly.
That's really it. Talk about the cloud aspects of this, because I know that you have a deep belief in that aspect of this and how important it is to it.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. I think cloud first appeared in my title in 2010. Right, so and that was the year I actually left government and went into the private sector. I was the first chief cloud executive for a global OEM software manufacturer in the data center. And so when I think about cloud and its function in digital maturity, I think about the outcomes that matter from a digital maturity standpoint, right? Which is faster, secure, efficient, and resilient, right? I think in some form or flavor, those are the measurable outcomes that clients and government agencies are seeking. And so in order to enable those outcomes, the digital maturity needs to focus on the full end-to-end capability of the life cycle, from requirements gathering through architecture, design, through build, and in some cases software code generation, through test, through deployment and operations and maintenance and enhancement, right? And there needs to be automation built into every step. That's where cloud comes in, right? The seamless progression of automation capabilities, tying them and integrating them together all the way through the life cycle, and then the ease of usability for government agencies to access those capabilities and to scale them out on demand, and then to retract those capabilities when they no longer need them. The elasticity necessary to use those resources as needed and to return them back to the pool, and therefore use those resources a little bit more effectively, is essentially bringing the promise of cloud through a more modern approach to digital engineering and systems engineering, and it's really an exciting time in technology when you now bring AI as an enabling capability that sits on top of that, right? And so that's exactly what our silicon to service capability at Deloitte is that we've just brought to the marketplace for federal governments to access.
And maybe talk about what you find is the expectation now of your government customers. What do they expect from you when it comes to digital maturity? Do they talk about that to you, or are you finding you're talking about that to them?
I would say both, depending on the customer, but some of our newest customers, newest captures, we're actually seeing those digital requirements written into RFPs, and we're responding accordingly with our proposals because digital now is just table stakes. A lot of our legacy programs, they weren't born digital, but they've had to transform to become digital to take advantage of the capabilities that digital ultimately enables. When you ask about what is the customer's role now that we have a digital ecosystem, is we expect our customers to be right there along with us during the design phase, during the build phase, and then we ultimately want to collaborate them as they're operating the weapon systems that we've deployed. We want to learn and capture some of that data so that can go and influence things like repairs or even the next design. How do these platforms work together? It's coming back to they are maintaining and they are hosting a lot of data that would ultimately be very beneficial for us to have access to influence the design. And I think that you're seeing that with the requirements that they've written. They understand that, and we understand it as well.
So in the government space, is that challenge still the process challenge a little bit? Because we've heard repeatedly through 2 conversations about collaboration and the importance of people on every aspect of the food chain to be part of that. But there's that procurement aspect in federal government, right? And there's contracting officers, and they're far removed from all of that collaboration and discussion. Maybe talk to that just a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny you said that because that's ultimately where I was going to go next, right? Was on the procurement side, right? And to me, it has to do some with just culture in general, right? And bringing that, the procurement practices forward to be able to fully leverage the capabilities that the digital maturity can bring to government agencies at this time. And it's not rocket science, but it's sometimes hard to transition existing proven practices that have been in place for so long and to carry those forward. And I think the formula is pretty simple though, right? Is just kind of repurposing the approach to be more outcome based, focusing more on the outcomes than the prescription on the details of the requirements. Requirements are always important, but more important to define the outcomes that are desired. Focusing on leveraging innovation and not locking into the technical debt, which also requires a little bit of a cultural change in how procurement is executed. And then leveraging the agile, iterative, low-risk kind of capabilities that the combination of cloud and AI are bringing to digital engineering and digital maturity in the marketplace, and bringing that all together in a more modern approach to procurement.
Vanessa, I think there's in government, there's a governance challenge with innovation and with AI. And there's no substitute for this shoulder-to-shoulder consulting, I call it, where you're sitting with your customer, helping them see things and how things might work. But when I speak with government chief AI officers and chief technology officers, for example, in this AI and Government Council, they frequently explain that they're kind of frustrated because they are perceived to be the folks who have to say no every time a mission office comes up with an idea that, whether with their contracting partner, their FSI partner or not, they're sort of a last step gate that says, no, you can't use data in this way, or you can't use technology in this way, or you could use technology in this way, but it's not part of our approved suite of technologies, it's not part of our vetted platform. And so they're struggling with getting involved earlier, understanding what's coming out of the research labs and what's coming out of academia and what's coming out of industry. And if you could back up that governance 2 or 3 years to make them aware 2 or 3 years in advance of what might be coming for approval, then everybody is going to do a more efficient job of framing, planning, and delivering on these advanced technology projects. So I think as part of this, we need to help solve that governance problem that the folks who, absolutely have to make sure that the technology is safe, that it's used correctly, that it's secure, and that we're doing the right things with it, we have to bring them forward in the process.
Adam, definitely you work on some platforms and systems that were before all these.
Mm-hmm.
So how has that evolved and changed a little bit? How are you seeing that change happening? Or are you also feeling that friction, frustration a little bit too?
I would say both. We definitely feel the friction, but we are seeing that change happen. Technology is such that we need that technology for some of our legacy programs that will need to be matured. Our customer has that foresight and forethought and vision to understand that and allow us or even ask us to implement some of those capabilities. Going back to the last question, when we talk digital engineering and digital engineering ecosystem, we're changing that to be digital acquisition. And digital acquisition also applies to programs that have been around for decades and decades. Where can we insert logically some of these technologies to make those better?
Right. So the other part of
Correct.
the work that has to happen.
Exactly.
Well, that's about all we have, but I'm going to give you one last shot at it, Mike. You want to add anything about where you see this going next?
I think we said collaboration in some of those comments, and given that the strategic ecosystem has changed, the expectation of the customer should be that their ecosystem is collaborating on their behalf, right? These are complex solutions, these are not commodities. And so category management, choosing strategic ecosystem partners and setting the expectation for collaboration is a key.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming today. It was great to talk to everybody. I really appreciate you giving me so much time. We could certainly continue on this topic for much longer, but our time today is up. I want to thank each of you for another awesome discussion on enterprise technology within your organization. My guests today have been Doug Bourgeois, Managing Director for Engineering Transformation at Deloitte, Richard Jasek, Chief Digital Officer and Senior Vice President at Brillient, Adam Shepard, NG Fellow for Digital Engineering at Northrop Grumman, and Mike Watkinson, Chief Revenue Officer at Future Tech Enterprise. To check out more of our series, Delivering the Tech That Delivers for Government, including the first part of this conversation, which was on innovation, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Future Tech. I'm Vanessa Roberts. Have a great day and see you soon on Federal News Network.